Yesterday we covered tropical rainforest. I'm sorry, that was 2 days ago. Tropical rainforest, and we said that tropical rainforests were very specific in the fact that they were located near the equator. They were very warm. There was a ton of rain, like 400 inches of rain. Tons of plants, lots of big, huge trees. Obviously, enough rain there to support the trees. Very different than the taiga and the tundra. And we said that there's like an insane amount, like half of the Earth's plant and animal species live in the tropical rainforest. So when we talked about the sun, soil, water, we said that the sun was extremely intense. Why is the sun intense? Well, because it's located near the equator. We said that the soil was fantastic. We said that with the water, there's tons of water. One of the biggest things you got to be getting used to is the high amount of humidity, which is the water in the air, the moisture in the air, which is like at 77 to 88% year-round. And Fabiana, those are the days when you just walk outside to the car and you start sweating, because it's not even, it's like your parents might say, it's not the heat, it's the humidity. Because 85 degrees is not that hot, but you throw in 88% humidity, you're going to sweat a lot in that area. So we learned a lot about the different abiotic factors. In order to live in the tropical rainforest, obviously the biggest two things you need to adapt to is the heat and the amount of water, and the insane amount of predators that live on the forest floor. So many of those animals, we learned, live up in the trees their entire life, which we thought was kind of an odd thing to do, but there's a ton of birds there, so that's not really shocking. The sloth spends most of its life in the trees. That's not shocking. Monkeys spend most of their life in the trees. That wasn't shocking. And so we learned that, again, many of them spend their whole life in the trees. And you have to have camouflage, or you're going to get caught by that jaguar we saw, which also has fantastic camouflage. You need to have bright colors, either to attract a mate or to scare things off to where they think that you're poisonous, or you actually are poisonous. And I'm going to pause really quickly. We talked about prehensile tails, which is one of the things that helps monkeys stay in the trees their entire life, because it allows them to hold on and eat food and sleep and do other things like groom each other, which we saw in one of those videos. Tons of insects in that tropical rainforest. And then we moved yesterday into the temperate rainforest. And Hunter, we started to notice some big differences in the temperate versus the tropical rainforest. Number one, the sun's intensity, not nearly as intense in the temperate rainforest because it's not located on the equator, right? The soil in both places has to be fantastic. Look at the insane amount of trees, bushes, ferns, and everything else that's growing in that area, right? Fantastic soil. So sun, soil, temperature, way different. It's not a tropical rainforest. It is a temperate rainforest, which means it pretty much remains very mild and cool all year long. And then we talked about the water. And no, it doesn't get 400 inches of rain per year, but it does get 200. And then there was that insane fact that the fog produces about 7 to 12 inches of rain per year. Now, if you went outside early this morning, you got to see some good fog moving through. I went outside, I had the flashlight taking the dog out like I do every morning, and it was kind of fun to sit there and just shine the light up in the air, and I could watch the little teeny tiny droplets of water floating through the air because, again, fog is a low-lying cloud, which is really neat to kind of see. But 7 to 12 inches just from fog was kind of a mind-blowing fact yesterday. They have two distinct seasons: long, wet winter, short, dry summer, which I don't think surprised many of us about that when we started learning about it. So that was the sun, soil, temperature, and water. And then we learned about some of the plants and animals in the area. We said that there are tons of ferns. There are tons of moss in the area. So all of this moss, all of these ferns grow very well here. Why? Well, because in this area, ferns and moss need a very damp, moist, and kind of a darker area, and you get that in the temperate rainforest. We learned a lot about these things called nurse logs. These are big trees that have fallen, and in those trees you have decomposers that eat, you have insects that live there, small mammals that live inside of them, moss grows on them, giant trees grow through them, because we saw that decomposers were breaking down those nurse logs as they're being broken down by bacteria and other decomposers and turning them back into carbon, nitrogen, and good soil. We talked a little bit about the banana slug and other things like bear and bobcats and cougars that live in the temperate rainforest. One of the most was probably going to be the elk or the landscape gardeners of the temperate rainforest, because their job, their niche, is to run around and eat plants. But as they're doing that, they're also giant animals. And Anna, as they're stomping through the forest and eating, they're helping keeping the undergrowth under control, helping that carrying capacity stay under control so that it doesn't become a thicket. It stays a temperate rainforest, which was very important. Not going to spend a whole lot of time on this banana slug slide. This was more for fun facts because it is fun to learn about unique animals in these areas. And we watched our videos yesterday about that. And that brings us today to the desert. The desert, again, we're talking sun, soil, temperature, and water. And when we start looking at the desert, we start to realize real quick that the abiotic factors of the desert make it a very inhospitable place to live. Few animals, few plants are adapted to live in a place where the sun is intense, the soil is sandy, there's very little water, right? And the temperatures can be extremely, extremely high. And then sometimes at night get actually kind of cold. The desert is extremely important. It covers about a fifth of the Earth's surface. Deserts do. There's cold deserts and hot deserts. We're going to focus mainly on the hot ones. Antarctica is the largest desert in the world, while the Sahara in Africa is the largest of the hot deserts. Again, we're going to focus on the hotter deserts. In North America, there are 4 major hot, dry deserts: the Mojave, the Great Basin. You don't have to memorize all those. That's fine. Coastal deserts, you got Atacama Desert in the Chile is something that's another one out there. Again, cold deserts. I know that sounds crazy. Deserts are typically hot, and that's what we're going to focus on. But there are places like in Antarctica and Greenland where vegetation is sparse, and they have very poor soil, and they don't have a whole lot of water. So you're reaching those desert pinpoints, and so you would probably label it as a desert. Let's talk about the desert climate. We're talking about hot deserts, okay? The season in hot and dry deserts is very hot. Right? That one's pretty easy. And warm during the rest of the year. The winter, you get very, very little rain. Rain is either comes like in short bursts or maybe like a quick storm. But because it's so hot in the desert, a lot of the times when it does rain, the water hits that hot sand and evaporates right back into the atmosphere before it can really sink into the soil and do any good. This is one of the reasons why the deserts have such a dry characteristic. Again, we are going to focus on the hot and dry deserts in here. We won't see a whole lot about these cold deserts that we might look at later on. So if you're taking notes at home, again, the desert sun's very intense. It creates a very hot environment, one of the hottest. Soil is terrible. It's sandy. Not many plants have adapted to live in this. It's not just the soil, it's the amount of water and the heat as well. Temperature is the hottest of the biomes, and it's also, with your precipitation or water, Jesse, it's very little. It's the driest of all the biomes. You got the hottest and the driest of all the biomes with terrible soil. Doesn't sound like a great place to live, does it? In the Atacama Desert, 1 millimeter, not inch, 1 millimeter of rain falls every 5 to 20 years. Doesn't rain very often. No. Matter of fact, it's possible that it's not rained at the Atacama in your entire lifetime. No, you don't have to write that. That's just a fun fact. Just a fun fact. Desert plants. Desert plants obviously have to have some insane adaptations, right? If you're going to live in such a hot, dry environment, you need to be able to store water and also find the water. Some of the plants have seeds that can stay dormant in the sand for a long time, so the seeds fall off the tree into the sand and they just sit there and they wait. They wait like a 5th grade teacher waiting on his kids to stop talking, which is a long, long time. And it just sits there waiting on water, and eventually water falls and they end up able to grow. If you're a cactus, the cactus is one of those that has learned to live and adapt in the desert. It has a waxy coating on the outside. That waxy coating is very similar to the waxy coating on those trees in the taiga, those coniferous trees, those conifers. Why is there wax on the needles of a conifer? Who remembers that? Jesse. To cut down on the amount of transpiration or water leaving the plant, right? We said it's kind of like a deodorant, which keeps you from sweating. Hopefully you put that on today. And it's also one of those things that keeps the plant from sweating or transpiring, letting water come out of it, because obviously you don't want to. And in an area like that, it would be very easy to sweat, right, and lose water, but they're able to hold water in because of that waxy coating, which is pretty awesome. The roots are pretty shallow. They're not very deep. There probably would be good roots to survive also in the tundra because they don't go very far down, but they spread way, way out. Why do they spread so far out? Glenn? So that any water that falls, they're able to soak it up instead of going deep into the earth like that. And as soon as the water falls, they can get that water and absorb it immediately before, again, it evaporates. You'll find some bushes, some creosote bushes, sagebrush. Do you have to memorize all those? No, if you remember cactus, you're probably going to be fine. Desert animals. And in the background is probably my favorite desert animal. It is a fennec fox. We will watch a video of this in just a few minutes. Deserts are very important. If we get to go on our field trip this year, you'll get to see a fennec fox at the zoo. So keep your fingers crossed on that. He's pretty cool. Deserts are important, and it's not because of all the sand. It's because of some of the animals that live there. You have cold-blooded animals like snakes who have learned to adapt and say, hey, if this is a place that stays warm most of the time and I'm cold-blooded, that's a good place for me to be. I can't live in the Arctic. I can't live very well. I mean, you can live here, but you have to like hibernate and stuff. There it's warm all the time. It would be good for you if you were a cold-blooded animal. You might have kangaroo rats, kit foxes. It's hard to survive in the desert because there's not a lot of water. There are animals in the desert who don't drink water at all. How do they survive, you ask? They get water from the insects they eat. All the juices inside of the insect is the only way that they get liquid. Is that kind of gross early in the morning? A little bit. But it's something that works out for them. Mice might build their homes in a cactus that has fallen down. So again, that's kind of like those nurse logs, right? So if it's similar, the cactus falls. It's not like it just sits there and goes to waste. It's decomposed and broken down, but there are other things that use it as a food source and as a habitat. I'll get your questions in just a second. This video is unavailable. I'll figure out what that is, and we'll try to get into that later on. It's all right. And I'll pause it. All right, so let's cover the last part of the desert here. If you're a biotic factor in living in the desert, like if you are a plant or an animal, your big things, you got to overcome the intense heat and the super lack of rain, because those are two very important things that we've learned in every ecosystem. Like living things need to have a temperature that's something that they can sustain, and also they need to have access to water. And so if you're going to live in the desert, you need to be able to adapt to the high heat and the low amounts of water. The cactus has done that. It's covered in a wax that helps seal in water. It has shallow roots that grabs rain as soon as it falls. And then your animals, many of them are nocturnal, which is what Jesse was talking about. They come out at night to avoid all the heat during the day. You know, if I lived in the desert, that's when I would go out. Although I would be scared to go out at night because that's also when the snakes and scorpions are out. So I would be kind of petrified to go out at nighttime. Hence, I would not live in the desert. You need to be able to conserve water to survive. And many of these animals are going to take shelter during the daytime to avoid that heat and that sun. That will wrap up our stuff because I've got to find out how I can get a different video in here, but that's okay. And we'll come back with the deciduous forest. And so that my kids don't scream at me today, smash the like button and subscribe. Click the little notification bell so you get notifications when I have new videos coming out. And we will rock on after that.